Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Institute for the Critical Study of Society Sunday morning Marxist Forum. Each week, we gather online at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time to engage in critical analysis of the forces shaping our world. If you haven't already, you can sign up for our weekly announcements at our website, ICSSmarx.org. Our format will proceed as usual. We'll begin with a presentation, then pause for a brief intermission with announcements. Then we'll open it into a collective discussion where all perspectives and questions are welcomed. My name is Paulina Vasilyev. I'm a member of the ICSS Program Committee. Our focus this morning is a country undergoing profound and underreported change, Mexico. Despite being the United States' largest trading partner and having a population over 3 times that of Canada, the immense political transformation that has received startlingly little attention in U.S. media. This shift began in 2018 with President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, known as AMLO, and continues under his successor, President Claudia Sheinbaum. Both represent the MORENA Party, which, despite being founded in only 2014, now commands majorities in the Mexican Congress and Senate. And even amid overwhelming domestic popularity, this transformation is now actually drawing intensified U.S. attention, but not for good reasons. To guide us through these developments, we're joined by Rick Sterling. Rick will draw from his personal observations and the excellent new book, Mexico in Transformation, From AMLO to Claudia. Rick is a board member of the Task Force on the Americas and the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center. And his analysis of international issues, including Mexico, has been featured in publications such as LA Progressive, Consortium News, Global Research, and Dissident Voice, among others. So please join me in welcoming Rick Sterling to the forum.
Thank you very much, Paulina, and it's very nice to be here again. It's great to see some very familiar faces. Kudos, salute to Eugene and many others. So it's nice to be here. And it's actually especially appropriate because I don't know how many of you are aware of this already, but yesterday in the Zocalo, the main plaza of Mexico City, there was a huge rally of 600,000 people listening to their president, Claudia Sheinbaum, on the 7th anniversary of what they call the fourth transformation. So I'm going to be talking about that today, and I hope, at some points in the discussion, I'm going to give some sources that I recommend people look at. But I thought I would begin by just having a quotation from the book here, which has the same title as our talk today. I'm going to be expanding on that, and we'll have some personal observations, but I do recommend this book, which is titled Mexico in Transformation, From AMLO to Claudia. And the author, who is a former emeritus professor from the University of Toronto, begins the book by saying, "Although I have an academic background, this is not an academic book. It is a committed book intended for a broad audience, above all in Britain and the English-speaking world. It is based on the conviction that Mexico's fourth transformation is a revolutionary process of global importance, whose significance has not yet been generally appreciated. The book is informed by my academic training in history, thoroughly researched and referenced, but presented, I hope, in an accessible style." And I would just say that having read this book, it's definitely accessible. It's got a ton of very useful information, and I'll be making a few of the points here, but I do recommend people who are interested in Mexico and what's going on there to read this book. It's just 200 pages long, and it's well written. And the book was referred to me by my friend Terry Matson, who's a journalist based in Mexico City, and just Just at the end of October, my partner Elitzigas de Lumende, Roger Harris, who many of you will know, of course, and I went to Mexico City, and we were hosted by Terry, who showed us around the city for several days, and met some very important journalists who work in Mexico City, and saw some of the changes that have taken place, and got a sense of the city. But in any case, I want to begin by referencing the person who really spearheaded this transformation in Mexico, whose name is Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, otherwise known as AMLO. And I first became interested. I traveled extensively in Mexico in my youth in 1969, and became very fond of the country and the people at that time. But it was reading AMLO's book, New Hope for Mexico, which he wrote when he was running for the presidency in 2018, that I was really inspired, because his sincerity and his specific recommendations really come through very strongly in the book, and I do recommend that. I wrote a review of it that was published in various places, but the book was a powerful message. It named specific people. It said what he was going to do, what he was not going to do. It laid out a very creative plan, and it also had an element of moralism and ethics, which was kind of striking, and one doesn't see too much of these days. And that kind of impressed me, his evident sincerity and his belief that honesty, hard work, and generosity are important, and they need to be recognized and praised. And I saw he was kind of talking about that in a way that was that came across as very sincere. And I followed his presidency for 6 years in Mexico, and it was very, very much the case that he practiced what he preached. They call it the fourth transformation in Mexico, the first one being the 1810 independence from Spain, the second one being the 1850 liberal reform movement with Benito Juarez, which in the 1850, in the early 1850s, of course, was just following on the 1848 revolutions in Europe. And then the third transformation was the 1910 to 1917 revolution in Mexico. And so AMLO said that he wanted a fourth transformation in Mexico, and he set about doing that, and he's achieved it in some very significant ways. I think it was really the neoliberalism he attacked very directly in his book and in his practice as first as the mayor of Mexico City, and then later on very much more strongly as the president of Mexico. Of course, Mexico went through a very destructive period of neoliberalism that began in the 1980s and then carried on right through until AMLO won the election in 2018. One of his sayings was, "For the good of all, but first the poor," and he definitely practiced that. The minimum wage was raised, doubled, and then tripled. Pensions were provided for seniors that had been very much restricted before, so that there would be pensions for government workers, but not for most other people. And then he provided it for all the people. He created a scholarship program that millions of students were able to get scholarships to go to school. They started an internship program whereby the government would pay a minimum salary to a company that hired students and that provided them with training, and then 60% of those people went on to work in the company and get jobs. The infrastructure was changed very dramatically under AMLO. At the time of his winning the presidency in 2018, they were partway through the construction of a new airport for Mexico City, and that was very problematic. It was a huge cost overrun, and it was being built in an area that was very environmentally destructive, and so one of those big, huge infrastructure projects was they did a referendum in the country. They argued at the pros and the cons, and they ended up deciding to cancel that project, which had already been underway, because of the corruption involved, because of the cost overruns, and because of the likelihood that the project would never be completed on time, and if it was, it would be environmentally destructive. And they canceled that project and have built a new airport at what was previously a military airport. It's about 30 miles from Mexico City, but with the high-speed subway, that's going to be very accessible. And the reports of everybody that I've talked to who has been there, it reports that the airport is fantastic. It's very beautiful. It's very efficient, and interestingly enough, it was military engineers that did the design, that did the well, they had contractors doing the construction, but these were all very much a part of a bidding process. It was constructed and on budget and on time. So, and that's an example of their using the resources of the country. For example, the military engineers, the engineers from the military, from the Army. They're putting them to very good use. Just as an aside, we saw when I was in Mexico City in October, we saw examples of the National Guard and the military contributing to society, because they're not just on their bases or not just doing military training. We saw the military setting up for a public venue in Chapultepec Park, this huge park in downtown Mexico City, and the military was setting up the stage apparatus and the seating and all that. So they're put to very good use all over the country and in all sorts of ways. That's serving the public. Another example of the big infrastructure changes is regarding the Maya train, and this is a train that's being set up in the Maya regions. And it's been controversial. The Zapatistas opposed it very strenuously, but other indigenous groups supported this very much, and the project has gone ahead, and it's already carried over 1 million passengers, and it's used for local transport by the indigenous people, as well as by tourists who are gaining access to some of the incredible anthropological sites in southern Mexico. Another example of infrastructure we witnessed and we actually traveled on was they are using gondolas to get to access the high hill areas of Mexico City. So people who live in the hills of Mexico City used to have to spend a long time going down narrow roads and winding roads and so forth to get to the major thoroughfares. And what they've done very creatively is they've installed gondolas, which have a very small footprint. In fact, it looked like they didn't have to clear any houses. They just put them in, and they put the supports for the gondolas on somebody's property, compensating them, I'm sure, but they're very efficient. We rode one, and our friend Terry reported that a journalist friend of hers who lived there said it saved him an hour commute every day. So they've been very creative about doing infrastructure development, and it's doing a lot of this stuff on budget and on time, which of course we don't see very much of here. Um, so one question is, where did they get the money from to provide all these resources to people, and especially poor people? Where did they get the money to suddenly expand the number of people receiving pensions, the number of scholarships for students, millions and millions of student scholarships? Interestingly enough, they did not raise taxes. What they did was they enforced the existing taxes, and they did away with the tax cheating by increasing the number of increasing the tax collection authorities. So, for example, Walmart had to pay $350 million in taxes that they had previously been able to avoid paying. And in the book here, it's reported that overall they collected $25 billion in taxes. They increased the revenue by $25 billion. So that's pretty impressive. And again, that contrasts very much with the U.S., where taxes are reduced for the wealthy, and the wealthy are able to avoid or evade paying their taxes. And it seems like they go after the people who can least afford it. But in any case, that's what they did, and that's what AMLO was saying in his book, New Hope for Mexico. He was saying they were not going to punish or penalize corporations or the wealthy. They were just going to make them pay their fair share, and that's exactly what they've done. And it's like the saying is for the good of all, but first the poor. That was AMLO's saying. Now there's so just a little aside here. I'll talk and I'll do my presentation for 30 or 45 minutes, or perhaps a little more even. And then I'll look forward to people's questions. The transition to a new leader of Morena is very interesting, and I did an interview with Terry a few years ago, and the title of the interview was that Mexico should be our example of what is possible. And she said that, I mean, in the course of the interview, there's numerous points made, but she was making the comparison and the contrast between Mexico and the United States. And of course, we have a two-party system, and of course, there's numerous parties competing in elections, but effectively, there's the Republicans and Democrats. But on foreign policy, it seems like it's the unit party, and of course, when Bernie Sanders attempted to challenge the Democratic Party leadership, his efforts were crushed. And so Terry makes the point that what they did in Mexico should be an example to us. They used to, I mean, the Institutionalized Revolutionary Party, or also known as the PRI, had dominance from the 1920s until the year 2000. And then after that, they changed party with the even more reactionary PAN Party, or National Action Party. And then there was a third party, the so-called Democratic Revolutionary Party, or PRD, but they were all, none of them really challenged the system as it had developed. And the PRI and the PAN were especially catering to the wealthy. Um, so what happened was that AMLO, this Lopez Obrador, Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, came from the southern Mexico and became popular as a leader. And then in the year 2000, he was elected the president or the mayor of Mexico City. He was very successful as a mayor of Mexico City, which today has around something like 27 million people. This is one of the biggest cities in the world with huge challenges to lead it effectively, of course. But AMLO was very effective, and he worked with other popular leaders in Mexico, and he was in the PRD, and he actually won the election in 2012 and 2006 as well. There's evidence that the elections were stolen, and but he became frustrated with working working in those groups, and so in following the election in 2012, he decided to go on his own and with people who thought like he did, and to try a new course. And they established the movement for the Morena, which is Movement for National Regeneration, otherwise known as Morena. And in 2011, 2012, they started it as a movement, just as an association, and they gradually made more and more contacts and gained more and more popularity. And then in 2014, they registered as a political party. And yet so they went from 2014 first being registered to 2018, where he is elected as the president of Mexico, and Morena has a majority of seats in the Mexican Congress and the Mexican Senate. So you can see what an amazing achievement that was done there in terms of organizing and challenging the status quo. And he did that in David Raby's book, Mexico and Transformation. He talks about this and how effective AMLO was as a leader, uniting opposition forces and traveling all over the country. Apparently, he visited 2,400 communities. So this is somebody who traveled Mexico from north to south, from east to west, visiting large communities, small communities. He became more and more popular, and he not only became more popular, but he started to understand what was going on more fully, and generate allies. So this is how. This is part of how they were able to achieve this amazing success, taking power in 2018. As I mentioned in his book, New Hope for Mexico, he lays out his plan very specifically. He says what he's going to do. He says what he's not going to do. He names some people who he says he's going to be going after. And so when he came into office on December 1, 2018, so 7 years ago, his plan was clear, and he got a very fast start, and he started doing things right off the bat. One of the first things he did was he slashed his own salary. Then he sold the presidential jet. And he mandated that all high-level public officials, the days of high living and five-star hotels and expensive government-paid restaurant and vacations, that they were over. So he called it civic austerity, So they set an example, and he personally set an example very much. Not only that, he set an example of very hard work. He would work 6 to 7 days a week, and Monday to Friday, he would start the day at 7 a.m. with a press conference. And if the journalists wanted to find out what was going on, they had to be there at 7 a.m. in the presidential where Congress meets. So he would start the day at 7 a.m. and this is continuing under the current president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She sleeps in 30 minutes later, so she starts her mañanera, as they call it, at 7:30 a.m., which is still pretty early for some people because they presumably have to get up an hour and a half before then. But in any case, AMLO started the day with a press conference at 7 a.m. and he would tell what the priorities were. He would talk about what he was going to do that day. If it was a special day, he would recognize it and talk about the importance of it. And he would also refute misinformation that was in the media the previous day. So it was very effective in a way of communicating with the Mexican people. And anybody who's on Twitter can look at the mañaneras, as they call, of Claudia today. You can go to her Twitter account and see what she's saying and see the video of her presentation. And this was true, of course, of AMLO as well. I'll mention this later as well, but I can just, since I'm on the subject, you can see an English translation of and summary of the Mañanera by going to the Mexico Solidarity Media. So that's Mexico Solidarity Media, and there's a very good website which has excellent information there. And as well as I noticed they're having summaries and sometimes translations of the Mañanera that Claudia Sheinbaum is doing daily. So one question is, AMLO did he changed the priorities totally. He combated neoliberalism. For example, they constructed an oil refinery. A huge oil refinery because they were having to their existing oil refineries were very old, they were not very efficient, and they were having to export a lot of their heavy crude oil out of the country and then bring it back and then import it in a refined capacity, which AMLO said he compared it to exporting oranges to import orange juice. So that was a pretty understandable way of talking about it, and very true. So they built an advanced, a very modern oil refinery that has a huge capacity, and they nationalized some things. The train system. They are developing the train system. They intend to have a working, efficient, modern train system that runs the breadth of the country from north to south to east to west. They established a cross isthmus freight railway system that is in development, and this is it's already working, but it's still being developed and made in large capacity. And this is going to allow ships it's going to be an alternative to the Panama Canal, because ships that are taking containers can dock on the port on the Pacific side, and the containers are very efficiently moved onto trains and taken across the isthmus to the port on the Caribbean side or the Gulf side, and then shipped from there. So this is something that's being very efficient, and it's being developed. So AMLO, in his 6 years of presidency, and it's by the Constitution, they don't allow re-election. So he could not be re-elected. If he could have been, he would have been. But instead, they had a very honest way of who was going to be his successor. And my friend Terry Matson talked about this at some length. She was very impressed because there were several people in the Morena Party and in the government, in AMLO's government, who were good leaders and that were willing to become the new president and were desirous of that. And so, and they wanted to avoid the appearance or the reality where the new leader was just an appointee of AMLO. And so Terry explained to me that they developed a very good process where each of the candidates had to give up their cabinet position in the AMLO government to campaign and do their best, and each of them had to guarantee that whoever won, they would include the other leading candidates in their future cabinet. And so they did this. Marcelo Ebrard, who was the previous foreign minister and is the current economics minister in the Sheinbaum cabinet, he was a very strong candidate. He had previously been a mayor of Mexico City as well. And so I think he was the main competitor to Claudia Sheinbaum. But Claudia turned out that she had the support of the most people. And so she became the candidate for Morena. And when they held the election last year in 2024, she won even a bigger majority than AMLO had won. She won 61% of the popular vote, and the Morena Party became a supermajority in the Congress and the Senate. So now they can make various changes to the Constitution and various changes that require a 2/3 vote in the Congress. Now they'll be able to do that. So Claudia came in promising to continue the legacy of AMLO, and she had 100 promises. AMLO had previously done something also like this, some very specific promises and commitments. So I'll just read out some of Claudia's promises. Support for women aged 60 to 64. So all Mexican women aged 60 to 64, so that's under the 65-year age that people are guaranteed a pension. They will receive support. They receive half the normal pension, but that's a big help for women aged 60 to 64. Universal scholarships for public school students and free university education. Expanding public health care, including house-to-house visits by doctors for the elderly and disabled. Housing, building at least 1 million homes and providing low-cost improvement loans. Just as an aside, so Mexico is going to be building 1 million homes. How many homes or apartments have been built in the U.S. Over the last 10 years? The government doesn't do this at all now. And so continuing, these are Claudia's promises. Continued minimum wage increases. So they keep increasing the minimum wage, and also moving towards a 40-hour work week and better pay for public servants. Mexico didn't have any restriction, and even today they've got a 48-hour work week, which incredibly enough is down from what it was. But they're committing to starting next year, they're going to go down by 2 hours every week. So to achieve a 5-day, 40-hour work week. Price stability, keep prices of basic food basket, electricity, and gasoline from rising above inflation. On energy, invest heavily in renewable energy. Anti-corruption, eradicate nepotism, prohibit family members in office, and also judicial reform. They are going to change the judicial system so that judges are elected rather than being appointed for life. Security, strengthen the National Guard, improve intelligence, focus on high-impact crime reduction. Constitutional reforms, implement judicial overhaul, that is the election of judges, recognize public ownership of energy, and also recognize indigenous rights. So they've made huge advances there, so that the indigenous people of Mexico have a right to education in their native language. Water, review the water law, modernize irrigation, improve the water supply treatment infrastructure, and lastly, make Mexico a scientific power, investing in technical and research. And of course, Claudia Sheinbaum is a PhD. She did some of her PhD research at Lawrence Berkeley Lab in, right in the Bay Area here. And she is one of the environmental group that won the Nobel Prize some years ago. So we've got our own president who wants a Nobel Prize, and Mexico has one who actually did it. Now I want, on the question of security, this is one, and it was very interesting reading AMLO's book about the cartels and the real problem of violence and crime in Mexico, and drug running and the cartels, and the death and destruction that can be caused. And that's a problem that didn't arise overnight, and it won't be solved overnight. But AMLO had a very different way of talking about that. He in his book New Hope for Mexico, he said they weren't going to try to go toe to toe with the cartels. That sometimes it killed a lot of people, including innocent people who weren't even involved in it, and sometimes they were outgunned by the cartels, which of course receives high level weaponry from the United States. So he said that they were not going to do it that way. That it's been tried many times in the past, never successfully, and it just resulted in a lot of excess deaths and violence. And so he said what they needed to do was provide alternatives for young people, so that they would not be either forced or lured into crime and joining cartels. And so that was the basis for his argument that what Mexico should be focusing on was improving the job and education prospects for young people, and that's exactly what they've done. Let's see. I'm just looking at my notes here. But the changes so Claudia is continuing and advancing the changes in Mexico. When we were there in October, we learned that homicides are down 35% just in the last year. So I asked the Mexican journalists we were talking with, how is that possible? And they said that they think it's because of they've got some new intelligence. So they've been able to defeat the cartels, or reduce the cartels, and reduce the death rate by by investigating and charging and arresting and imprisoning the culprits rather than just big gun shootouts. Now, so Claudia, as though I just gave a glimpse there of her 100 promises, and by the way, Claudia's speech is brilliant. Her speech from yesterday. Once again, I want to underscore that when Paulina and I talked about doing the presentation today, I wasn't thinking that this is the 7th anniversary of the fourth transformation, but yes, indeed, yesterday was the one, and it was celebrated in the Zocalo that's the Grand Plaza in Mexico City, and about 600,000 people cheering their president. And if you go to Mexico Solidarity Media, you can see the English translation of her speech, and it is a brilliant speech. And so that's just something that people who are, more interested in Mexico will probably want to take a look at. Meanwhile, we have the Trump-appointed ambassador to Mexico, who is Ronald Douglas Johnson. And there's a lot of Ronald Johnsons, of course. But Ronald Douglas Johnson is the ambassador to Mexico. And he's got a very interesting background. He was Special Forces Green Beret, advising the El Salvador military in the dirty wars of the 1980s. So that's quite an accomplishment. Then he was in the CIA. And then he was, following that, Trump appointed him to be the ambassador to El Salvador, which has been under the rule of the popular but semi-fascist Nayib Bukele. And of course, some of you will be very aware that some deportees from the United States have been shipped to El Salvador, where they're imprisoned and the keys thrown away. In any case, Ronald Douglas Johnson was the ambassador to El Salvador and was protecting Bukele from scrutiny and from criticism. And so now he's been appointed by Trump to be the ambassador to Mexico. So what more could you ask for? Somebody with a military background, somebody with the experience with the dirty wars, somebody experienced with the CIA. And so there you have it. So just a few weeks ago, there were protests in Mexico City and in different parts of the country. And I would say that I would recall that we were there in late October, and we saw rallies of PAN, National Action Party activists. We saw rallies that they had, but they were just very normal, and we saw some slogans. They accused the government of being a narco state, and they accused Claudia of being a narco this or that, and they accused AMLO of being this narco, so this or that. There's no evidence to support this. There's a lot of evidence to support some of their previous presidents of being involved with the cartels. But they're false accusations regarding AMLO and Claudia, who, as I was saying, are very explicit about their promotion of ethics and morality. In fact, they have an ethical guide which they have published, and this isn't a law. It's not a direction that people will follow, but it's something that they promote very much: hard work, diligence, generosity, honesty, sincerity. So, so I was starting to say that just a few weeks ago there were these protests, and now I've got an interview with Kurt Hackbarth, who is American, but he's lived in Mexico for decades now, and he's a top flight journalist reporting there. And we're going to show. Paulina, could we show the interview with Kurt, which is describing these events that happened a few weeks ago? Could you do that, please?
Sure. And let me know just, oh, let me see one sec. Oh,
It was in the chat.
yeah. I had it open and I apologize. Well, here we go. I'll have to go back to the chat. If you want to keep talking for a second,
Okay.
Rick, because
Yeah. Well,
it closed.
well,
Sorry, I have to go back up.
thanks to
Okay, I
Paulina
found it.
because yeah.
Yeah, here we go. All right. So, all right, let me start sharing.
Last weekend, you may have saw that Mexico saw a wave of violent protests that mainstream corporate media framed as, some spontaneous Gen Z uprising. But there is growing evidence that raises serious questions about who was really driving that unrest. To break that all down, we are joined by one of our favorite recurring guests, Kurt Hackbarth, writer and journalist for Jacobin and host of Soberania. Is it so? Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm like butchering. I'm butchering Spanish. Thank you. Which you should all check out, the Mexican Politics Podcast. Kurt, sorry I fumbled, but welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. And how do you do, fellow kids? Right? To quote the famous Steve Buscemi meme, which I think is the most apt way to talk about Saturday's AstroTurf March. And let me just point out before we start, the look, Ryan, I have furniture now. Remember you interviewed me a few months ago?
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, you seem like you were being held hostage because you had no lights.
So there's a little bit of ambiance here.
Well, we're really thrilled that you've been liberated from the hostage situation that we found you in last time when you had just moved. Glad to hear there's furniture in the place. That's very exciting. And on that note, let's get to those AstroTurf protests. Kurt, can you tell us what happened on Saturday? Was this some genuine Gen Z uprising, or was there a bit more to it?
No, it wasn't. That's the short answer. A couple of months ago, nobody was talking about Gen Z in Mexico, right? It just wasn't a term that was part of the parlance here. But you saw, of course, the Jolly Roger flag in Indonesia and in Nepal. And very much like, the raised fist of the 2000s that traveled from, the color revolutions in the former Soviet republics to Venezuela, these things become basically off-the-shelf franchises that if you have enough money, you can just buy the franchise and try to import the color revolution to your country. So that's very much what happened with, the Jolly Roger flag here in one piece, right? What instigated this march was actually a sad event, a tragic event, which was the assassination of the mayor of the town of Uruapan in Michoacan, Carlos Manso. There is an important conversation to be had about security in Mexico, in the context of a U.S.-fueled drug war, right? Claudia Sheinbaum's government in 1 year has managed to bring homicides down 37%. But of course, throwing statistics at people who are in difficult situations, is not, the most sensitive way to handle a situation. So we know that there's an important conversation to be had about how to handle security in Mexico in the context of, drug demand from the United States and arms coming from the United States. That said, the march itself was, a totally an AstroTurfed event, right? You saw these supposed Gen Z social media accounts pumping out, clearly artificially intelligence-made videos of instigating violence, with images of National Palace, what you're seeing on the screen up in flames, the cathedral up in flames, wanted dead or alive signs for Claudia Sheinbaum and for Lopez Obrador, right? So there was a clear attempt, and how ironic that this was supposedly a march against violence, instigating violence. There was an attempt to portray this as a spontaneous youth uprising, along the lines of, other countries we've seen with more or less degrees of, organicness to it. So we go to cover the march on Saturday, and we were looking around for the young people. There hardly were any. There really weren't. CNN managed to find a couple, right, to kind of bolster their narrative. But let's take it kind of in two parts. The first part of the march was very much along the lines of previous opposition marches that we've seen over the years under basically the slogan of the Maria Rosa, the pink tide, right? Very much middle to upper middle class, skewing towards the elderly. Remember, this was a march that was held on a Saturday. Working class people in Mexico work on Saturday. They work either half or whole days because they have a 48-hour work week, which is something the left is trying to change here. So just by the fact that the march was on a Saturday, you know that the march wasn't for them. And it was very clearly a middle and upper middle class crowd along the lines of the Maria Rosa. So we interviewed a bunch of them. You can check out the interviews on our Soberanía podcast, actually organic social media. And they were very much along the lines of what we call in Mexico the tias panistas, which in English would be your kind of loopy aunt, the ones kind of at the Thanksgiving dinner table when, just come out with this just kind of crazy stuff. And you're like, did she just say that? Kind of that kind of demographic, right? Of the tias panistas, right? Fustigating against, all the ills they see in Mexico. And it's funny that the slogans, kind of the whole issue of Carlos Manso got lost amongst, anti-Morena sloganing, really nasty, insulting stuff about Claudia Sheinbaum, her anatomy, her religion, her ethnicity, just really kind of nasty, nasty stuff. There were Nazi elements actually in the Zocalo itself. The far right was out, right? So there was all of that in there. So the whole ostensible issue of Carlos Manso got lost in there. Now, had there been a speaker in the Zocalo to maybe kind of channel the demands or kind of bring things together, because, okay, there's a march. People, you can't control who goes to a march. Sometimes people say different things. If there had been a speaker there, maybe they could channel the demands and kind of unify voices to say, we're demanding this. But there weren't any speakers. Because the whole point of the march was not to, unify demands, but to create the kind of scenes you're seeing on the screen now. And that's when the second part of the march comes in, right? The first part of the march was the tias panistas in the back, right? Average age about 62, right? But when you got to the
Gen Zers,
the Gen Zers, the fellow kids with their skateboards, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, check out our interviews on Soberanía. You can see some of them, and kind of they go off. Like, Trump would be so much a better president for Mexico than Sheinbaum. I mean, just off the wall stuff, right? Wow. And they're saying because Lopez Obrador and Biden let in immigrants. It's like, what country are you talking from here? Anyway,
yeah,
go check it. But when you got to the Zocalo, things changed. And we saw, running along the sidewalk to get ahead of everybody else were a bunch of basically kind of shock contingents, clearly paid, with very special tools, right? With which they, got into the front and were sawing away to separate those barriers you see that were protecting National Palace. Now you see some voices saying, oh, well, Morena's scared. Why were they putting barriers in front of National Palace? They always put barriers up at every march. It wasn't just this march. They do it at every march, and they do it to protect, architectural monuments, right? And they also do it to protect people from themselves, right? Because, sometimes people get out of hand. They start, trying to knock things down, burn things, and they wind up hurting themselves. So the barriers are always there at every march, every kind of march. So they separated the barriers, and then they started going after the police with some of that heavy tools, right? So the police, responded to the extent, that they could. And there you go. That's what they wanted. They wanted to produce those kinds of scenes for international consumption, for Alex Jones and all those accounts to say, look, Mexico is in an unstable position. Look what's happening. The youth are rising up. And of course, the United States always creates the problem for which they then sell the solution. And the solution is, let us intervene. Just say the word. And right on cue, you saw Donald Trump saying, I'm not happy with Mexico. And you saw the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City tweeting out, hello, we'll only help if you want it. Just say the word. It was all very well orchestrated.
Yeah, maybe I think that's a good place to stop, Paulina. Yeah, thanks very much. I hope everybody was able to hear and see that okay. Kurt has written many very good articles published at Jacobin, and he and Jose Luis Granado Ceja are regulars on the Mexico Solidarity Media, and they also are broadcasting on television in Mexico, as well as they're doing work on Mexico's Solidarity Media project in English. So that's a very good source. Now, I'll just...
Rick, apologies, just to ask you please to wrap up, because we do have to honor our participants who want to ask questions and leave them at least half an hour.
Of course. Yeah, just a couple more minutes, Paulina. I want to point out that a couple of things. I was curious to see how the New York Times covered the AstroTurf protest. And indeed, they gave it huge coverage, huge photo with the title, Protesters Rage Against Mexico's Government Over Corruption and Violence. So that pretty much says it all, promoting the and exaggerating the event and failing to recognize that it really was a very much a manufactured event. And then, but in the headline, talking about government corruption and violence, as opposed to, and I was interested to see how they covered yesterday's rally of 600,000 people celebrating the 7th anniversary of the Mexican transformation. There's not a thing, there's not a story, there's no report on it. So that's all the news that's fit to print. So I think we're going to see, I expect to see increasing U.S. efforts to destabilize Mexico, because as much as it's been underreported, there are big changes happening there, just as Professor Raby has documented in his book. And Mexico is an example of an alternative path, and it's also an example of something that we can learn from. So I'll leave it at that and look forward to some questions.
Thank you so much, Rick. After a few short announcements, we'll have questions and comments. You can do that by raising your hand virtually in your Zoom window. It's under reactions. Please keep your questions short and ask one at a time. And just to tell you that on December 14th, that's a week from today, we'll have Mary Gao speaking to us about Rocking the Boat, flashbacks of the 1970s Asian movement. And we invite everybody to join us at 10:30 Pacific time and sign up at ICSS.marks.org for those announcements and to get the link to our Zoom session. And now Sharon Rose, fellow program committee member, had a few words. If you're ready, Sharon.
Yes, thank you.
Let me, let me just spotlight you real quick so you can be seen. Go ahead.
Thank you. So before we go into the discussion of this very important presentation that Rick just made, I wanted to remind us that today is December 7th. the anniversary of the beginning of the war in the Pacific. And just also to remind us that the real days of infamy that will be remembered are the days in August of 1945 when the United States dropped atomic bombs on the people of Japan. And I want to share some documents that I found extremely interesting. I'm just putting it in the chat. We historical materialists understand that history is not a blueprint, but an important teacher nonetheless. And it's very important for us to understand history in order to think about our strategic view of going forward. And these two documents I want to recommend. So Tricontinental earlier this year produced a report, the 80th anniversary of the victory of the World Anti-Fascist War. And it was presented at a meeting in China where Vijay Prashad gave an introduction. And the title of his introduction is Communism Defeated Fascism 80 Years Ago and Will Defeat It Again. And I just highly recommend those two documents today on the anniversary of the US involvement in the Second World War. Thank you.
And did you have a question for Rick, Sharon, or I thought I saw your hand raised. No, okay, great.
Let other people do that. Yeah.
Let's do that. Sounds good. Let me make sure that everybody is able to unmute. Yes, okay. Now, let's see. Let's start with Freddie, followed by Lucy. I'll take the hands as I see them. Freddie, are you ready? Otherwise, let's go to Lucy and then I'll take Freddie. Oh, Freddie's ready. Okay, go ahead, Freddie. You're muted. Freddie, you're muted.
Okay, I was just able to unmute, just for the record. Okay. So first of all, I just want to say that thank you for the presentation. Also, I want to preface my comments by saying that I'm a supporter of Claudia, a big fanboy, and of AMLO and Morena. I think, though, that we, as the left, need to be principally critical also. I agree with all these great advances, but I think one of the problems, especially if people don't understand Spanish and are not listening to left socialist programs that are in Spanish, that they're just getting maybe folks like the Soberanía program, which I find problematic. At least one or both of those gentlemen work for, I think, Canal 11, which is a government sponsor, just like the Canadian Broadcast Company, sort of Mexico. So, there are problems, for example, like the Zionist influence in Mexico that's huge, that has not stopped with the fourth transformation. There are problems with the genocidal state of Israel, selling military hardware and intelligence infrastructures to Mexico. That's been ongoing in the state of Oaxaca. And the governor is Morena there. I mean, most of the governors, as you pointed out, are Morena. So that's sort of my broad comment. And if you can comment if you like on that. I just feel like it's a disservice when we only point out the positive things. And of course, compared to the US, a lot of places are a lot better. But I think there's a lot more work that they can do. I think there's still a lot of connections to neoliberalism. I don't think that just sort of stopped. And then I'll just leave one example. Both AMLO and Claudia, of course, were the mayors of Mexico City, which is the equivalent of basically being a governor, because it's so huge. when there were the gentrification protests going on a few months back, Claudia's response in the Mañanera was that she was comparing essentially gentrifiers and digital nomads to the Spanish revolutionaries who fled the fascist Franco regime, and basically saying that in Mexico we welcome everybody. But the examples she gave were people fleeing fascism in Spain and fleeing fascism in the Cone. And so I don't know if she has bad people advising her or something, because Morena is like a huge tent, perhaps too huge. So anyway, any comments on that?
We saw a lot of pro-Palestine graffiti in Mexico City, but I'm not familiar with what the policies of the government are. I don't, there are probably contracts between the two governments and Israel or Israeli companies, and I think they should definitely. I would strongly hope they would terminate those, but. I mean, sometimes countries have to, they will they will terminate their economic relationship gradually over time. So it may well be Israel's, of course, a huge exporter of military hardware now. So maybe Mexico buys that from there. That I don't know. I would certainly hope that they would. Um, you know, end end that relationship. But uh, I'm not sure. I don't know the situation on that specific issue, even as important as it is. I think it'd be worth looking into. I certainly wouldn't. I think I agree with you that it's important to not have rose-tinted glasses to look at the shortcomings, but the overall picture is overwhelmingly positive. And on the international front, of course, Mexico is good. I mean, when AMLO did not go to the OAS summit in Los Angeles, it was huge, and he didn't go because Nicaragua and Cuba were not invited, or Venezuela and Cuba were not invited, so he didn't go. And when there was a coup in Bolivia, Mexico sent a plane to Bolivia and effectively rescued Evo Morales. So I think in a number of international issues they have been exemplary, but it may be that there's some shortcomings. That it may be that there's not as good as we like on in terms of boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel.
Thanks, Rick. Lucy is next, followed by Janet.
Thank you so much, Rick. I really enjoyed your presentation, very informative. I was born in Mexico, and I really appreciate your views on it. The thing that I was worried about was kind of like what you were just talking about a minute ago. I was watching Ben Norton. I don't know if anybody knows about him. He's a journalist that he was doing an analysis of a document that just came out that the Trump administration has released. It's called the National Security Strategy. And they were talking about their plans for the Western Hemisphere, which includes, of course, all of Latin America. And what, if I understood this right, what they plan to do is to re-establish their super control and really tighten, really tightly the Latin American hemisphere. I mean, the countries in Latin America, which includes, of course, Venezuela and Cuba. So their plans of removing any vestige of left governments which I would suppose it would include also Mexico and Sheinbaum, Morena. And whether they are aware of this thing, because it's something that we had a feeling about for a long time. I knew the minute that they were threatening Venezuela that it was meant for all of Latin America. And Venezuela was just the first one that they were attempting to grab, to get. And the thing is that they really want is to defeat China. And that they know that they can't break away from China because of the links of the dependency, the commercial dependency they have, but they really, really think China is their main enemy.
Lucy, if you could wrap up your question, 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. I just want to know if Mexico is aware of this threat, if they are in any way thinking about it.
Yes, I'm sure they're very aware of it. I'm sure their security services are looking into the protests that happened a few weeks ago, at which about 100 security officers and police were killed, or were not killed, but injured. There were reportedly 120 people injured, 100 of them being police and National Guard. So I'm sure they're very aware of it. If you read AMLO's book or listen to his speeches, he's very sharp. He's very, he understands international politics. He understands the Mexico's position vis-a-vis the United States, that it would be very much against the Mexican interest to just condemn everything that Donald Trump does or Joe Biden does. So he is respectful, and Claudia is as well. She was in Washington a couple of days ago. She's respectful, but they're solid. They're dignified, and they're diplomatic. And so I think they're very aware of this, and I'm sure their security services are looking into this. Somebody asked in the chat an interesting question, whether they could have declined the appointment of the ambassador who has the El Salvador death squad experience and the CIA experience. I think clearly they could have refused the admission of that ambassador, but I'm sure they calculated that the U.S. was going to be undermining them no matter who was there in the embassy, and that it wasn't worth provoking more ire by Trump if they had refused him coming in as ambassador. So the short answer is I'm sure they're very aware of it, and they are working to counter the attempts by the U.S. that is certainly making to undermine their success.
So why haven't the countries developed a united front? Well, maybe because of the governments that are in power. Yeah.
Lucy, yeah, go ahead, Rick, briefly, because we do want to do one question at a time.
No.
Yeah. Well, very briefly, there is something called CELAC, which is the community of Latin American and Caribbean countries. This is like the OAS, but it excludes Canada and the U.S. And Mexico's been a big supporter of that organization.
Great. Janet is next, followed by Richard Wright, and then Virginia and Daniel.
Thank you, Paulina, and thank you, Rick. As you know, Colombia's military is not allied with its president, Gustavo Petro. I understand Mexico's president does not control its own military. I'm wondering if Mexico's military would support Mexico against a U.S. military venture there versus not. Anyway, that said, I'm also wondering how President Sheinbaum is handling Trump's border crossing policy and what Mexico's relationship is with El Salvador, and then and Mexico's foreign policies in general. But I'll end by saying, sorry, Mexico participated in the Hague Group's Emergency Conference of States in July 2025 in Bogota, Colombia. I don't think Mexico signed on to its joint statement that followed. And as you know, Petro made a Uniting for Peace proposal back in September, and then his visa was canceled and he was sent back to Colombia. Do you know what Mexico's relationship with Colombia is? I know it's a lot, but
Yes, that was a lot, Janet. But the first one I think is especially important, and I can comment on it regarding the military. As you know, the Venezuelan leadership, one of the reasons they have not been overthrown in a coup is because there's very strong relationship between the Venezuelan military and the government, the PSUV government. And Mexico, I don't think they've got that strong a connection, but they have a strong connection. There's a strong bond between the Mexican military and Morena. They one of those actions that AMLO did right off the bat was he eliminated the 4,000 person presidential guard. So this was a body that had extra training from the U.S. and had served very loyally all the horrible presidents in the past, and AMLO did away with it entirely. And they have raised the salaries of soldiers. They've given them new responsibilities. For example, the responsibility for some of the infrastructure projects, not only the engineering but the construction. So he has really worked with the military, and I think there's a strong connection between the military in Mexico and the Morena government. As to the relation with Petro and Colombia, I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that specifically. As to the relationship with El Salvador, the same thing. I'm pretty sure they would be very much opposed to the idea of any deportees going to imprisonment in El Salvador, but they are very big. They have it in their constitution. They have sovereignty and non-interference, so they will not comment about affairs in other countries often. They may have strong feelings of support or opposition, but one of their principles is sovereignty, self-determination, and non-interference. So just as they will not stand for and they will protest or not stand for interference in Mexico, they don't want to interfere in the affairs of other countries. So I'm a little bit unsure where they would stand. I suspect they would be supportive, certainly much more supportive than not, of Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia.
And the border crossing, the U.S.-Mexico border crossing?
I am not. I mean, they've spoken out with outrage about the sending people back. People who have lived here for a long time but are undocumented, and they make it. In fact, AMLO toured major cities in the U.S. when he was campaigning to be president, and so they have I don't know how strong it is, but they definitely realize the importance of Mexicans who are living and working in the U.S. But I'm not sure about the development of the current state of I'm not sure what their exact position is today.
Right. Richard Wright is next, followed by Virginia and then Sharat Lynn.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
that'll be our last question, because our speaker does have to leave at noon.
Yeah, thank you, Rick, for your presentation. Something it seems to be one of the theses of this session is to learn what we can bring back from these situations, and implement here in the United States to really get at the heart of the beast, if you will. And in that regard, you really kind of skipped over, and I'm not faulting you for that, but you really skipped over the early years of AMLO's construction of how he got to the presidency. In particular, could you discuss what we can learn from his implementations of the shadow governments and the development in the southern parts of Mexico, what we can bring back to here and implement it? Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hi, Richard. I'm not sure what you're referring to with shadow governments, but I think in terms of your overall question about what we can learn, I think it's important when you're gonna challenge a long-established status quo, you need some individuals who have a lot of charisma, have a lot of popularity, and have a lot of ability to get along and unite rather than divide. And I think AMLO did that. He has those talents, as well as strong principles and strong beliefs that really were in accord with the majority of people in Mexico. As I mentioned, his book, New Hope for Mexico, it's very interesting because he's so explicit and so honest, and saying what he will do, what he will not do, and that's something that U.S. politicians don't want to do. They don't want to be very, very specific oftentimes. So I think there's a lot we can learn from the process. I would just another personal note is I would recommend to people to visit Mexico, because the visit to Mexico City that Roger and I made in October was very impressive. The city is very clean. You did not have a security threat issue. Any big city, you've got to exercise a certain amount of caution, but unlike some big Latin American cities where there are a lot of young men hanging out on corners looking for people they can pickpocket or otherwise victimize, one didn't get that sense in Mexico City. It's very much a family-oriented place. It's very vibrant and thriving, and we had a very, very positive sense of that. And just another little comment. I have made a couple of trips. I also went to Cabo, not Cabo San Lucas, but another place in Baja, and I was and also last year we had a family trip to Puerto Vallarta, and in terms of the response to AMLO, I saw firsthand how it's very much a class issue. When we talked with the maid at the hotel in Puerto Vallarta, what she thought of AMLO and Morena, she was all thumbs up. She was glowing. She talked about how they had support for pregnant women now. So in contrast, when I asked a store owner in Baja near Cabo San Lucas, she was saying nothing's changed. So there's a bit of a class divide in terms of the perception and the attitude and the support for AMLO and Morena.
Mm-hmm. Right, Virginia and Daniel, you can unmute.
Okay, it's me, Virginia. Let's see. I guess this has to do with theory and practice, kind of. And sometimes I feel like I'm a little too old for doing the kind of activism that I envision needs to be done everywhere. But so, kind of a sketchy question, but you mentioned housing, the building of housing, and how much housing is built in this country. Well, my perception is that currently all over the world, but I see it in this country, there are these very wealthy entities that are building this market rate stuff everywhere, and it seems to be intimately connected with political contributions. So I have this dark vision of this, which I'm sure of the class, the really big ruling class, doing they're hoovering up so much wealth all over the world. So when you say this about, they're building housing, how can they make it affordable? How can it not be just more of this same thing that I'm talking about?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Virginia, and it's nice to see Daniel too in the picture. But um, I don't know the details of it, but it speaks for itself. They're building low income housing for poor people, and there'll be some kind of there'll be a standard for people who qualify. But this is something that Mexico is doing. Claudia set the goal of 1 million, and I'm not sure over the time period of that, but and of course Venezuela has been remarkable in this as well. They've built many millions of housing units for low-income people, and this is something that the United States used to do as well many decades ago, but doesn't do anymore. But I think, well, I'll leave it at that in terms of the low income housing.
Rick, it's noon. Do you have time for the last question?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Okay,
especially because
Charette.
it's from Charette.
Great.
Well, thank you, Rick. It's good to see you. I have the pleasure of I had the pleasure of being there to witness both AMLO and Claudia give their victory speeches in El Zócalo, and it was a wonderful time. I wanted to first comment about the Claudia's policy on or what she's done with regard to Palestine. I mean, she was first of all the first Jewish president of Mexico, and 1.5 months into her presidency, she recognized the state of Palestine by receiving the Palestine ambassador. But my question relates to, the issue of the narco security state, and there is the case of of the Ayotzinapa, the 43 students, and getting to the truth of that has is still there's still so many obstacles, and the state has not really thoroughly investigated it, and so there's people who are close to the case are saying that it's not a question of Claudia doesn't want to uncover the truth, but rather that the state apparatus, in particular the security apparatus, is so tightly wrapped up with the cartels that it's very hard to unravel. Could you comment on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Charette. It was interesting to see in downtown Mexico City. There's a setup, a sit-in that's been going on for years now, where people have camped out and they're publicizing the case, and they've got pictures of the 43 disappeared students. So there are family members who continue to protest publicly about that. Um, what can be done? I mean, AMLO came into power promising to investigate to the, and they've done that. In fact, something like 115 people, including an attorney general and probably a state attorney general and 2 generals, have been charged. And so there have been a lot of high-level people who have been charged with complicity, not carrying out the actions, but they were involved somehow with the cover-up. And yet, still, we don't know what happened to them. And hopefully, I'm sure the investigation is continuing, despite the fact it happened 11 years ago. I'm sure the investigation is still continuing, and hopefully someday we'll learn what did happen. But so far, all they've been able to do is charge a number of high-level people who were somehow involved with the cover-up in one way or another. But they have done that, and I honestly don't know what more they can do. So I think the effort is there. I think the effort was definitely there from AMLO, and I think it's there from Claudia, and that if unless it's a complete waste of time, they'll be continuing, and hopefully at the end of the day, it'll sometime be revealed what exactly happened to those students who were disappeared. But I don't, I think it's still a mystery, and I just hope that eventually it'll come out. But I do believe that if they could solve the case and determine exactly what happened and who was responsible, I think they would.
Thank you so much, Rick. We want to honor our guest's time, who needs to sign off shortly. We would like to remind you that you can sign up for email notifications for our programs at ICSSmarks.org, where you can find links to video recordings of our past programs. We have a YouTube channel. We have a new Rumble channel. You can look it up. I think it's at ICSS Marks. You can contact us on our website with suggestions for future programs and topics. And please make a donation if you can to support our Sunday morning programs. We do have a budget, and we'd like to draw your attention to the coffee cup icon on our homepage. That leads to our donation page, where you can donate or contact us if you need another way to donate, and we'll respond. Thank you so much. And
You can't let me make my last line of comment.
I believe Rick does have to go, but we'll stop recording now.
He's got a minute for